This is the Detroit Sports Podcast Network.
Today's episode of the Motor City Sports Rant is brought to you by The Athletic. Premium coverage for passionate Detroit sports fans. Listeners of this podcast can save 30% off the first year of an annual subscription by going and visiting theathletic.com/DSP. Don't miss out. The Athletic has writers covering all the major Detroit sports events, and this fall, they're even covering Michigan and Michigan State football. All the hosts here on the network, we all read The Athletic every single day. Become a subscriber and save 30% off. All you got to do is go and visit theathletic.com/DSP.
Detroit is the greatest! Straight up light you on fire for a Coney dog right now.
Darren McCarty comes back to Neiman in front of him. McCarty draws. McCarty in. McCarty scores! A magnificent goal! Darren McCarty!
Stafford takes, throws, end zone, Calvin, touchdown, Detroit Lions!
Welcome in, everybody. Thank you for joining us on the latest edition of the Motor City Sports Rant. I am the Doc, John Macaroon. Jason, not with us today. He is obviously a very busy individual, but I hearken back to his tweet where he goes, man, do you find yourself talking to yourself when you watch a Detroit Lion football game, even if it's in the preseason? Yes, Jason, we all found ourselves talking to ourselves, wondering what the heck happened Friday. Home game versus the New York Giants. Everybody was excited. I mean, you had a feeling that Matthew Stafford likely was going to take the field. You wanted to see the offense. You wanted to see what was going to happen with Matthew Stafford playing extended series. And then you wanted to also see what does this team look like versus the Giants, Matt Patricia's first home game at Ford Field. Everybody was excited going on down there, enjoying happy hour, the reduced prices, getting out there and enjoying some food, snacks at a reduced price for happy hour. And then the game started to progress, and then you said, oh no, this is pretty terrible. This isn't what we want to see at all.
Oh no!
So what happened? Well, in essence, the Lions put a stinker on film across the board. Offense, defense, special teams, coaching. Matt Patricia did not have the Detroit Lions ready to play on Friday, and people then were left to speculate why. Why is it that the Detroit Lions, after practicing and spending time with the New York Giants, why weren't they ready to play? And some people said, well, maybe the amount of practices, the level of intensity that Matt Patricia has wanted early on in training camp and in the preseason has not helped the Detroit Lions. And they practice every morning. They're in pads, they're hitting, they're going hard. Matt Patricia wants to instill toughness. And remember what Bob Quinn said at the end of last season when he finally addressed the media. He said, look, I wasn't impressed with the overall toughness of the football team. And so when you have a new program, a new regime in place, you want to instill that. Matt Patricia comes in, the practices are tough, but the first two outings in the preseason have been very underwhelming. Like I was telling Adam, we said, okay, look, how much of a reaction we give to these preseason games, we're going to evaluate, and I'll talk about that a little later on in this podcast, because the Lions' history makes it so that you have to pay attention to the preseason. It makes it so that you have to pay attention to trends, and that's what Adam and I spoke about, is that we wanted to see less penalties the second go-around. We wanted to see a cleaner football game. Did we see that? No, we saw penalties galore. We saw major mistakes. We saw a linebacker get juked out by a backup quarterback and is now likely out for the season with a torn ACL. We saw, quality plays that were taking place, but not from the home team. The Giants walked away with the victory on Friday, and everybody was left with some anger, some real anger, and I believe it's warranted. When you look at the Detroit Lions, and you say, okay, how do you realistically evaluate this football team, this football organization? When you go into a season and you got a new regime, obviously there's always a turnover, about 30 to 35% of the roster each and every year. You want to see positive trends. you want to see battles that take place on the football field, and you want to see the Lions come out ahead most of the time. Well, what did we see on Friday? We saw one-on-one battles along the offensive line in which the Giants won those battles. You saw Matthew Stafford go back to pass, and on the majority of the passes that he dropped back was hit, and was hit hard. You're left going, and you're left scratching your head saying, this doesn't look like a positive trend. This doesn't look like from preseason game 1 to preseason game 2 that the team took a step forward. Now, the level of improvement that you want to see varies. Obviously, the team's not going to make that much improvement leaps and bounds week to week, but you wanted to see some improvement. The one thing you didn't want to see was the team go backwards, and that's what happened. The team that performed on Friday regressed from week 1. And you saw Amir Abdullah not being able to secure the football properly. You saw a bunch of mistakes. You saw penalties. You saw the offense not really perform well. And then you say to yourself, wait a minute, who's to blame here? A lot of the players, after the game when they spoke to the media, put it on themselves and said, look, we're not trying to have a long season here. We're trying to do the things that are necessary to have success. And Matt Patricia was obviously very rattled and shaken by that performance, and he came out and owned it and said, look, we weren't good really in any phase of the football game. When they take a deeper look at that contest, they're going to see some things that they're okay with in terms of some drives that took place later in the game, but those are the things that you really don't take too much stock in, because what happens in the late third quarter, fourth quarter in a preseason game, those are guys that are not going to be really on the roster. So that's where you go, okay, what goes on there later is really not much to pay attention to. What you can pay attention to is the fact that already Frank Ragnow is looking like a guy that's one of the better offensive linemen on the team. That doesn't make any sense. You saw it and you said, oh my gosh, there was a certain play where both Taylor Decker and Rick Wagner both got destroyed and lit up, and it resulted in Matthew Stafford being severely pressured and knocked down. Both guys, Taylor Decker sometimes loses these individual battles, and sometimes it really costs the Detroit Lions. Rick Wagner, I don't know. This was one guy that was a signing that was a premier signing by Bob Quinn, one of the early times in which he went out and spent big money on an offensive lineman trying to recruit him from the Baltimore Ravens. And he comes in, and early on, the reviews aren't that good. I mean, last year's offensive line wasn't that good. So far in the preseason, the offensive line has looked terrible. The run game in Game 2 was nowhere near the same as it was in that first game versus the Raiders. And you go, oh boy, Decker and Wagner are key pieces along that offensive line. And if he can't help in pass protection significantly, if Matthew Stafford is hurried and pressured, that offense can't succeed. Eventually, teams will say, okay, we're going to try and force you to be one-dimensional. Defenses will force the Detroit Lions to throw the football. They'll probably stack 8 in the box, try to limit Kerryon Johnson, LeGarrette Blount. They'll try their absolute best to stop one aspect of the Lions' offense and force the Lions to become one-dimensional and throw the ball 50, 60 times a game. That will be the game plan by the majority of the teams. If Taylor Decker and Rick Wagner and the others along the offensive line can't do the job, you're going to go, oh my goodness, it's going to be a long season. When you look at the defense, again, several plays where the Giants quarterback had several moments to survey the landscape and make big throws. The lack of pressure that we are seeing from the Lions defense against opposing quarterbacks is concerning and very alarming, because of the fact that you would assume by now that Matt Patricia's defense is starting to take shape in terms of what's going on. Now, everybody will say, and the reaction to us on Twitter was pretty polarizing. You had one section of the fan base that was like, look, you guys are way overreacting. On that Twitter page at Detroit Podcast, when you guys are commenting, when you are breaking down a game live and you're watching a preseason game, what is going on? Why are you reacting so strongly to stuff that takes place during the preseason? And the reason why that fans, that a lot of people look to what's going on with this Lions team is that the Lions don't have a marked track record of success. They don't have a lot of signature plays that have taken place in crunch time in the postseason. Now, they've had great seasons. There were great seasons for the Detroit Lions that ended in collapse and ended in failure. There have been several seasons in which the Lions have made the postseason, have played against people, and they've showed up and played terrible. Similar to what we're seeing in the preseason. A lot of penalties, don't look like they came to play, they weren't ready. And so we've seen this performance before. And so even during the second preseason game at home, we got a lot of tweets sent to us that said same old Lions. And so what does that mean? Well, people have seen this before. We have seen a performance similar to this. Why couldn't Matt Patricia and the Detroit Lions team come home, play a clean, absolute, wonderful performance, and destroy the New York Giants? Why couldn't that happen? Why couldn't the Detroit Lions show up on the field, execute, have Matthew Stafford lead the team down the field for an effective touchdown drive, throw the ball all over the field, zing it, have Amir Abdullah add to his resume, improve upon his preseason, and do better than he did versus Oakland? Why couldn't that happen? Why couldn't Matt Patricia have the team ready to play? Why did the team look so tired? And so when you ask those questions, you find that those that are supporting the Lions are making an excuse, and they're saying, well, look, everything is vanilla. They're not obviously scheming for anything. They're just trying to win battles. But if you're not able to execute at the easiest level, okay, and so I'm breaking it down, looking at it from this prism. If you're not able to win a couple one-on-one battles in vanilla defenses and vanilla offenses, what's going to happen along the way throughout the season when Matt Patricia's defensive schemes really take shape? They're only going to get harder. They're only going to install more delicate and more intricate schemes. What's going to happen? You just assume that, okay, they can't execute vanilla defenses, but then throughout the course of a 16-game season, then these guys are just going to turn the light bulb on and execute delicate and intricate defenses that are reliant upon a lot of insight and a lot of knowledge and a lot of awareness. You just assume that the Lions are going to flip on the light switch and it's going to happen. What gives you that idea? The past? No. There have been tons of times where there have been situations in which tight ends have been roaming free in the middle of the field and the Lions have not adjusted. There have been tons of times where running backs have been able to take over contests. There's been tons of times where quarterbacks are able to survey the landscape and make big plays at critical times. Have you guys not watched the Detroit Lions? Does the past history just not come into play at all when you evaluate this team? It just, you go into it and you tell yourself, this Detroit Lion team is, no matter what, going to win 9 games because of the fact that Matt Patricia and Bob Quinn work together. Is that what you tell yourself? Because when you make your rationalizations for why the Detroit Lions will have success, yes, you're obviously going to need a lot of things to go well, and they are set up for success. They have talent. But you have to put it all together. You have to perform. A football team has to show that they can go out and execute. And when you perform that bad in the preseason, it lends to trends that will alarm a lot of people. And that's the source of a lot of concerns for those that saw that contest, is you didn't do enough to overcome the skeptics at all with a performance like that. You have to show positive trends because the history of the Detroit Lions has been inept. The history shows that history is on the side of the skeptics. By and large, history is on the side of those that are dissenters of the Detroit Lions. History's not on the side of the fans. How can fans that are rooting and cheering blindly for the Detroit Lions realistically have hope that this team is going to do it? Now, can they? Of course. They're not hopeless. Having a team that has no hope is terrible. But when a skeptic, when somebody poses something that's negative to the Detroit Lions, take it seriously. Don't just dismiss it as, oh, you're a hater, or oh, you're just some silly fan that doesn't know anything. We're all watching. We're all seeing the same things. We're all seeing that, whoa, Matt Patricia right now isn't the wonder kid. He isn't coming in here and just walking in and doing magic for the Detroit Lions. He's going to have to do work. He's going to have to figure out schemes. He's going to have to figure out what makes this team tick. He's going to have to put together a team identity, and he's going to have to do it with maybe some guys already that are not happy with what's going on. I mean, did that not look like a team that did not really care what was going on? Did that look like a team that was invested in fighting for every single play? That kind of looked like a team that quit. And that looked like a team that was exhausted and not mentally ready to take on a challenge of a single preseason game. And that's quite alarming. And I'm not being an alarmist. I'm not being somebody that's overreacting to what I'm seeing. I've seen this many times, many performances in the last 5 years. And that's why I'm a little bit more skeptical. Sometimes, obviously, my fandom takes over and you start throwing out 9 and 10 win predictions. But in order for that to happen, in order for the Detroit Lions to win 9 or 10 games, things got to fall right in a lot of areas. And it doesn't start with poor performances in the preseason. I think you should look at performances in the preseason. Those that say this is all meaningless, this is all worthless, and the only thing that you got to think about is injuries, and the only thing you got to think about and concern yourself with is everybody walking away from games 3 and 4 healthy. No, you got to have the team trending upward, and you got to have them peak around the time of that first game, or you will lose at home in that first contest in front of the national audience. The fine line between winning and losing in the NFL is razor thin. It comes down to a small sliver of plays that determine whether a football team wins or loses. And if they can't execute properly in the preseason, you better believe that late in the third quarter, fourth quarters, when the Lions are driving or things are important, you don't think that there potentially could be a holding penalty or a mental lapse that could take place for the Lions, or a huge run by Kerryon Johnson that's negated by a penalty, or a mental mistake that cost the Detroit Lions. We've all seen it before, so we want to clean that up. Talking about the bad things that took place on the field were the penalties. Holy cow, the undisciplined nature of what's going on, the mental mistakes, and sometimes some of those penalties are a result of being tired, holding, just getting flat out beat. Going forward, the Detroit Lions have to tighten up, and they have to play a lot better brand of football to avoid holding penalties, to avoid penalties that will cost them key yards, because a team that's undisciplined, a team that has mental lapses will take too many penalties. And a team that takes too many penalties will be at a disadvantage in terms of field position. You'll give extra possessions. You will give up big, huge chunk plays in terms of pass interference should the defense not be able to stop these wide receivers. And so I want to see in Game 3 versus Tampa, this is what I want to see. I want to see a contest in which the Detroit Lions destroy the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I want to see a clean performance. I want to see Matthew Stafford execute that offense and outduel Jameis Winston and outduel a backup quarterback. I don't want to see backup quarterback put up better numbers than Matthew Stafford. I want to see the Detroit Lions roll into Tampa and click on several cylinders. Not all, because that would be unrealistic for the Lions to click on all cylinders, but I want them to click on a lot more cylinders. I want to see the offensive line perform a lot better because that unit was also, rated as very poor in terms of their performance versus the Giants. They weren't able to do a lot of things to help the running backs out. So the bad, obviously the penalties and the offensive line. The good that came out of it, well, you got a chance to see Jake Rudock show a little bit of resiliency, but right now I'm a little bit concerned regarding the future of Jake Rudock with the Detroit Lions because you probably would assume that Matt Patricia and Bob Quinn are a little bit more comfortable with Castle knowing the offense and knowing what he knows. And Jake Rudock's got to do a lot probably to stay with this team because I'm thinking, I don't know if the Detroit Lions will stick with 3 quarterbacks when there's needs that you could fill at another position by just having 2. So Jake Rudock's got a big opportunity these next 2 weeks to really show what he can do. Along the offense, I mean, you gotta see a little bit more from Marvin Jones, from Kenny Galladay. You got to see a little bit more from the tight ends. You got to just see a little bit more as preseason's game 3 and 4 take place. And you just want to see, not specifically in terms of points scored, you want to see rhythm. You want to see drives extended. You want to see long drives. You want to see the Detroit Lions being able to take advantage of mismatches that are afforded them. If you can't, like there were several series versus the Giants in which the Lions went 3 and out, and you were left scratching your head because, holy cow, the Giants just had like a 17-play, 9-minute drive. You get the ball back, and how do you respond? With that effort? No, it's unacceptable. You got to respond. You got to step up to the plate and handle your business, and that's what I want to see versus the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And I do think that Matt Patricia, by reworking maybe the practice schedule, by easing things up just a little bit, will probably have a fresher team I think early on the message was sent, and this was done purposely to kind of break down the squad and say, look, in order to be successful in the NFL, you got to be tough. You got to be tired. You got to be feeling really awful and then go into a game and perform. And so now he's got film to utilize to teach these guys, look, it's not going to be easy to just walk on the field and win an NFL game. We're going to break it down. We're going to make you guys exhausted, and then we're going to see what you got. But I do think they're going to scale it back a little bit, maybe by modifying practice schedules, ease up a little bit, give some days off this week. I do believe the Lions had Sunday off, so it is something where some adjustments will be made by Matt Patricia and that whole organization, because you perform like that games 3 and 4. I know the age-old thing that the most common thing that was messaged to us was, oh, the Detroit Lions went 4-0 in 2008, and then they lost all their games. Okay, you have that argument, but don't you think during that preseason the Lions didn't show some trends that were a little bit concerning? I don't think a lot of people thought that the 2008 team would lose all their games, but I don't think that team was highly rated. Rod Marinelli and that bunch there were criticized quite a bit during that preseason for some of their performances and the way things were shaking out as well. It wasn't all positive. It wasn't like during that season everybody had like supreme hope and things like that. It just turned sour real quick, and then it turned epically bad. But what do I see for the Detroit Lions this week? I definitely expect to see a hungrier team, a more upset, frustrated team at the way that they performed, because everybody was not happy. Everybody walked away from that performance looking at it like, ooh, it's nasty. It's like a wart, and you don't want to put that on film for everybody to see. So I expect to see growth. I expect to see that competition will continue at a lot of positions, and I do think Matt Patricia and the coaching staff will pay attention deeply to different aspects of the schemes and really put together a game plan, because this is the dress rehearsal. This week, what takes place in the next 7 days is the most similar to what will happen during a regular season game. So what we watch, I believe, this Friday in the contest versus the Tampa Bay Buccaneers will be indicative of what we can see for some games versus other opponents. And I'm hoping that the Lions step up to the plate, no doubt about it. They need to. They need to silence the critics. They need to put some quality plays on tape so that the skeptics can quiet down, because they erupted after such a terrible preseason game. Do you think I'm crazy? Do you think that what I'm saying is totally out of line? Message me at Detroit Podcast. I'll definitely engage in conversation. Love talking sports with our supporters. The reason why we've been able to grow this network is because of your support. And if you want to support us, the free and easy way to support us is to visit our website, DetroitSportsPodcast.com. You can check out when each show airs. You can see who's behind the operation. You can check out all the quality guests and past podcasts and really enjoy quality audio in Detroit sports. Thank you so much. We've been able to keep the microphones hot, the lights on here in our Sterling Heights podcast studio because of your support. Definitely check out DetroitSportsPodcast.com, and we thank all the sponsors that support us and help us continue to enjoy broadcasting and podcasting at the highest level in Metro Detroit. Now I want to end this podcast touching on some noise that has crept up regarding Jim Harbaugh and the Michigan football program as it relates to DJ Durkin. So for those that don't know, DJ Durkin was hired on a couple of occasions by Jim Harbaugh. He was the defensive coordinator for one season under Jim Harbaugh prior to taking the Maryland job. And DJ Durkin obviously has come under significant fire because of the fact that a player died under his watch, was basically worked out to death. The training staff that was put together did not handle the situation properly at all. There are investigations regarding the entire culture of Maryland. And now some players like Jabril Peppers, two former athletes that played under Jim Harbaugh at Stanford, have come out and said, look, we're happy that there's some noise surrounding DJ Durkin and Jim Harbaugh because of the fact they're both not good individuals. And so obviously Jim Harbaugh was asked about it, and he took a defensive stance, and he said, look, I'm not talking about it. I can only speak on my program. Well, people wanted to ask that question and wanted to press a little bit because of the fact that everybody kind of now wants to speculate and ask, well, if there hasn't been that much success at Michigan and there's been a plethora of transfers from Michigan, some people will just say and dismiss the transfers as, look, if you're third or fourth on the depth chart, you're just going to want to leave and get some playing time. But those that have left have also now commented negatively regarding Jim Harbaugh. And so people want to say and evaluate, how are you relating to your players? Are you really this quality head coach that's worthy of this massive deal that you have signed, given the fact that the success on the football field hasn't been where it needs to be? And Jim Harbaugh hasn't addressed it. And some people will say, look, those aren't questions that need to be asked. This is just the media trying to drum up interest in things that are not important. Well, it is important, and I do think that Jim Harbaugh would have put this to rest with a statement saying, look, DJ Durkin, at the time he was a defensive coordinator, everything that we did was on the up and up. There was no problems, and we feel like the culture here at Michigan is of an outstanding nature and of quality. Now, it is tough because if you make a misstep, if you're not prepared to answer a question, you might stick your foot in your mouth, similar to Urban Meyer and what he did. So I do credit Harbaugh. I don't blame him for not commenting. Eventually, should a statement be released? I don't think you should take questions, but should a statement be released? Yeah, I do think that when these type of questions arise regarding who you hire and who you surround your players with, I think it's very important. And while a lot of people aren't asking that question of Michigan, I do think it's important. Now, while that question being posed to Jim Harbaugh over and over again, I think it'll be put to rest, probably when DJ Durkin is fired and the dust settles and the season starts. If Michigan can win and they can get off to a great start, maybe even be undefeated by the time they face Michigan State, then a lot of this noise surrounding the program can kind of dissipate. But right now, prior to games happening, prior to really understanding depth charts and who's going to play where, because Michigan is so secretive, people are now also looking at some ancillary type stuff regarding, the program, who's been in it, who's coached teams, and especially with DJ Durkin and these former players really saying that Jim Harbaugh is a bad guy. That's a tough part because when you look at it, players that are made promises to or are told they're going to be a significant piece on the roster, and then somebody else comes along and takes their spot, these players are disgruntled, so they might have an agenda. They might be driven to say negative things regarding Jim Harbaugh. But by and large, a lot of the players that speak regarding Harbaugh discuss his passion and how much he does care for the players and how much he does want Michigan men to grow and evolve. But here's the tough side of the sports business, in that you have to have a little bit of thick skin as a player, realizing that the coach who's making all this money has a lot of pressure on him, and the biggest pressure is to win. And so just because you're the starting running back for 2 or 3 weeks doesn't mean you're going to end up, the starting running back in week 8 of the season. If somebody else comes along that has a plethora of talent and shines, your ass is going to be right on the bench, and that's the way it is. And it's not really a sympathetic sport. Big time football, big time basketball, big time sports. The pressure to succeed is super high because there's so many people that want the job, and there's always a plethora of talent, always somebody waiting to take your job. And so sometimes people are told things and they get a little bit sensitive. And so I can understand some people making negative comments, but I definitely would love to have heard why some people felt like Jim Harbaugh was not a good guy. But I don't think they're going to speak out on it a lot more. But Jim Harbaugh has a lot to do in terms of kind of quelling sizzling noise surrounding that program. It's not overwhelming. I do think that if you ask me what's the level of support of Jim Harbaugh, I do think it's well over 85% positive. There is a growing negative bunch out there speaking regarding Michigan with the expectations and the lack of success. But if this season results in a 4 to 5 loss season, then I do think that the support is going to wane. And I do think that Jim Harbaugh, it'll behoove him to speak on a little bit regarding what actually happened under DJ Durkin's watch at Michigan, because if some of the former players continue to speak out on it and there is somebody that says, look, there were some abusive type things going on, or there's a film that comes out, or if there's some tape that comes out with Jim Harbaugh saying some not so nice things, or DJ Durkin being a little bit rough or insensitive or using extreme measures while at Michigan, then some concerns could elevate. But overall, by and large, at this point in time, I do think that Jim Harbaugh has run that program pretty clean and is doing what's in the best interest of the kids. But the question needs to be asked. We just can't assume that these coaches are acting in a way that's in the best interest of the kids. Because when you assume, that's when abuses take place. That's when things pop up that indicate that there's some trouble, and then you get what happens at Maryland. And what happened at Maryland tends to happen when there's no oversight regarding a coach, a program. Training staff was totally negligent and dropped the ball in terms of the care of a college athlete. Thank you so much for tuning in. Jason hopefully returns back next week. We will recap Game 3 of the preseason Lions-Bucs. Hopefully the Lions walk away without any injuries. They play well, and we can turn a tide because this week's going to be all negative across the board. Podcast, sports radio, everybody talking about it is going to be really, really down on the Detroit Lions. You'll still have those that support. You still have the ride or die fans, but I do think those are few and far between. By and large, a lot of people are skeptical, and they look at the Detroit Lions and they say, look, that offense throughout the year can carry that team, but if the defensive line, which is thin right now, doesn't perform, it's going to be hard to bolster it because you've made the bulk of the moves, and any additions are just going to be guys that were cut by other teams, and the hope that those guys can come in and be significant contributors is really low. Once again, if anything you've heard, if I've been totally inaccurate, if I'm just spewing fanboy comments, if you think I'm an idiot, definitely reach out. Let me know. Give me your take anytime at Detroit Podcast. Find us. We definitely love bantering back and forth. Thank you for finding us across the various platforms, Podomatic, Stitcher, iTunes, our website, Spotify. Anywhere you can find podcasts, you can find the Detroit Sports Podcast Network. Thanks for listening. You've just downloaded the latest edition of the Motor City Sports Rant.
Okay, nice idiot. F you. Bye-bye.
Good day, sir. I said good day.
All right. Take care now. Bye-bye then.
Loser.